Mark out here. Let's break down what CMMC actually requires.
Welcome to the deep dive. We are jumping right into a reality check today, and it is a pretty stark one.
Yeah, it really is.
I mean, it's March 2026, and if you are anywhere near the defense contracting space, or if you consult for those who are, you are already acutely aware of this. The lost decade of deferred cybersecurity compliance is officially over.
Completely over. The runway is gone.
Right. The bills are due. All those endless extensions, the grace periods, the polite reminders from the DoD, those have all dried up. Across the defense and industrial base right now, you can feel a very real, very palpable panic setting in.
Absolutely.
But today, we're not just going to sit here and admire the scope of the problem. We are going to explore a radical solution that is completely rewiring this industry from the inside out. We're examining a fascinating, highly strategic white paper published by Regulance. It's titled The Organizational Debt Problem: Why CMMC Compliance Projects Stall and How the Right Practitioner Makes Them Unstoppable.
It really is a watershed document for the industry because for years, the conversation has been entirely stuck on how impossibly hard the compliance problem is.
Yeah, we've all been to those webinars.
Exactly. We've all attended the webinars, we've read the articles lamenting the complexity of the frameworks, but this white paper finally shifts the paradigm. It stops complaining about the weather and starts teaching us how to build a better ship.
I love that analogy. And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack a new concept introduced in this paper called the Streamlined Compliance Architecture, or SCA. We are going to explore how this framework is fundamentally changing the game for the real heroes of this narrative.
The practitioners.
Right, the registered practitioners, the VCISOs, and the MSPs. Yeah, these are the people who are actually in the trenches doing the heavy lifting. We're going to see how they are taking what used to be 18 months of sheer corporate agony and compressing it into a bounded, hyper-efficient project.
This is just wild to think about.
It is. So whether you are a compliance practitioner yourself managing a portfolio of stressed clients, or maybe a business leader facing an existential regulatory hurdle, or just someone who loves seeing complex bureaucratic nightmares hacked into elegant solutions, this deep dive is going to give you major aha moments. Okay, let's unpack this. Where does this concept of organizational debt actually come from, and why is it so critical to understand before we even attempt to talk about solutions?
So to truly grasp organizational debt, we have to look at the diagnostic framework laid out by Jacob Horn. The white paper heavily references his work. And when we talk about organizational debt in this specific context, you have to understand it is not a metaphor.
It's not just a buzzword.
No, it's not a catchy corporate buzzword to throw into a slide deck. It is a systemic, highly measurable deficit of processes, documentation, and institutional knowledge. It represents the massive gap between what defense contractors have contractually promised the federal government they would do, specifically by accepting the DFAR 7012 clause, and what they've actually implemented on their live networks.
It's quite literally a debt. You signed a binding contract saying, I will maintain this specific security posture. You collected the revenue from that contract, but you never actually spent the capital or the time to build the posture.
You borrowed against your future security to fund your current operations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the timeline the white paper provides to illustrate how this debt accumulated is just damning. Let's walk through it. If you look back at 2015 and 2016, NIST SP 800-171 was published, and the DFAR's 7012 clause began mandating compliance.
Right.
The underlying assumption of the regulatory bodies at that time was that these contractors already had foundational security programs in place. They assumed they were just asking contractors to formalize what they were already doing.
Which was a massive miscalculation because the reality on the ground was entirely different. Most of these organizations, especially the small to medium manufacturers, absolutely did not have foundational security.
Not even close.
They were running flat networks, sharing administrative credentials. They lacked basic centralized logging. So out of the gate, they weren't just struggling to meet a new standard. They were decades behind basic IT hygiene.
So they're starting the race with a broken ankle. And instead of stopping to fix it, they just keep running. From 2016 to 2020, you have this era where contractors are signing these contracts containing the 7012 clause left and right. They want to win the bids.
Naturally.
But the catch was the self-attestation model. The government required no external verification. It was an honor system. So the vast majority of these companies simply failed to invest in the people or the processes or the technology required to actually secure their environments. I mean, why spend $500,000 on a complex network architecture overhaul when you can just check a box and win the contract anyway?
And that behavior is exactly what compounds the debt. And the bill for that behavior started to become highly visible in 2019. That was when the Department of Defense Inspector General conducted a massive audit and dropped a bombshell report.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, they found that the majority of the defense industrial base met fewer than 50% of the specified controls.
And when you pause and really think about what it actually means to miss more than 50% of those controls, it is terrifying. It isn't just missing a comma in an acceptable use policy.
No.
It means no multi-factor authentication, no incident response capabilities, no physical access logs, no encryption of data at rest. They were failing on the most critical foundational layers of defense.
And following that catastrophic realization, we entered the era from 2020 to 2024, which was dominated by the CMMC rulemaking process and all of its associated delays and revisions.
Which just made everyone pause again.
Exactly. Instead of using that 4-year window to urgently remediate the gaps the IG audit exposed, contractors largely used it as an excuse to wait and see what the final rule would look like. That gave them 4 more years of accumulating organizational debt.
Wow.
4 more years of hardware aging out, staff turning over, and unmanaged data sprawling across shadow IT. Horn appropriately calls this the lost decade of non-compliance. But now as we sit here in 2026, following the late 2024 effective date for 32 CFR and the late 2025 effective date for 48 CFR, enforcement is fully active.
The self-attestation era is dead and buried. The debt is finally being called due. And what is truly wild about reading this white paper is realizing the absolute delusion, or maybe just willful institutional ignorance, that still exists in the market right now.
Oh, the confidence gap.
Yes, the confidence gap. The authors highlight these staggering statistics. According to a 2024 survey, 81% of defense industrial base respondents express high confidence in their CMMC preparedness. 81% believe they are ready.
Which is mind-boggling.
Yet in that exact same survey, fewer than 50% were actually engaging in the key security practices required to pass.
It is a massive cognitive disconnect. And the data from other sources corroborates this delusion completely. Data from a 2022 CyberSheath survey of 300 contractors showed that 87% of defense contractors failed to meet minimum SPRS thresholds.
87%.
And a 2025 Redspin report showed 58% feel unprepared despite possessing a high awareness of the requirements.
So you have this massive 31-point chasm between what the executive suite believes their company is achieving and what is actually happening in the server room.
Right. And what's fascinating here is the direct, brutal implication this has for the practitioner. If you are listening to this as a VCISO, an external consultant, or the leader of an MSP, this confidence gap makes your job an absolute political nightmare.
Oh, I can only imagine.
You are walking into a boardroom where the CEO confidently believes the company is secure because they have been signing a piece of paper for a decade without consequence. And you have to sit down, look them in the eye, and tell them, actually, your entire enterprise is vulnerable. You meet less than half the legal requirements to keep your contracts.
Yeah. When a compliance champion tells leadership that the company is completely unready, contradicting leadership's deep-seated, historically validated belief that everything is fine, the messenger inevitably becomes the problem.
You become the bad guy for pointing out the fire in the living room.
Right. The executives don't want to hear it because acknowledging the fire means they have to spend money to put it out. But the stakes have fundamentally changed. There are very real, very public consequences to this debt now. We have to examine the enforcers. The white paper details something called the false start risk. For those who haven't been through an assessment, what does that failure mode actually look like on the ground?
The false start risk is a specific, highly damaging event. It occurs when an organization finally musters the courage and budget to engage a C3PAO for their official assessment. The lead assessor arrives to conduct the Phase 1 feasibility check.
Just the basics.
Right. At this stage, they aren't even interrogating the technical adequacy of the firewalls or the configuration of the cloud environment. They are simply checking for the existence and maturity of the foundational documentation. They want to see the system security plan, the policies, the network diagrams.
And because of that decade of organizational debt, they don't have them.
Exactly. The company simply lacks these basic artifacts. The assessor looks at a disorganized SharePoint folder with 3 outdated Word documents and stops the assessment right there. The company fails the feasibility check before the substantive assessment even begins.
They don't even get to the starting line. They get disqualified in the locker room. And the cost of that disqualification is brutal.
The financial cost is painful because the assessment fees are generally non-refundable. You just burned $50,000 to $100,000 for nothing. But the organizational cost is far worse. Think about the internal dynamics.
The politics of it.
Exactly. Every skeptic in that company who spent the last year saying, this is a waste of time, we aren't ready, IT is overreacting, they are suddenly validated by a third-party auditor. It completely destroys the internal political capital of the compliance project.
The VCISO loses all their credibility in that moment, even if they were the ones warning the CEO they weren't ready. And if the false start isn't terrifying enough for these executives, the white paper brings up the False Claims Act.
Yeah, that changes everything.
It changes the calculus entirely. It is no longer just about whether you have a data breach or a ransomware event. Misrepresentation itself is now the violation. If you upload a perfect 110 score to SPRS, but your real internal state is a 45, the Department of Justice is coming for you under the Civil Cyber Fraud Initiative.
And we have the concrete receipts from 2025 to prove that this isn't an empty threat. The DOJ isn't just sending warning letters, they are extracting massive settlements.
Big ones.
The white paper cites specific cases. Morse Corp settled for $4.6 million. Raytheon, specifically their Nightwing division, settled for $8.4 million. Even academic institutions are immune. Georgia Tech settled for $875,000. The enforcement is highly active, and it is designed to be deeply punitive to serve as a deterrent.
The DOJ is actively incentivizing whistleblowers, too. An unhappy IT employee who knows the SPRS score was falsified can file a qui tam lawsuit and take home a percentage of a multi-million-dollar settlement.
Which happens more than people think.
It's a totally new risk landscape. Yeah. And there is one more trap the authors mentioned that is catching companies flat-footed, the option year trap. A lot of contractors think they are safe because they just won a 5-year contract back in 2023. They think they don't have to worry about CMMC until 2028.
Right, they think they have one way.
But program managers across the DoD are now aggressively requiring CMMC certification for option year renewals on those existing contracts.
It is a devastating surprise for cash flow projections. You think you have 3 years of guaranteed revenue to fund your compliance remediation, and suddenly your option year is up in 6 months.
And the program manager says, show me your CMMC certificate, or we are not exercising the option.
You are suddenly locked out of your own revenue stream. And 6 months is simply not enough time to fix a decade of organizational debt using traditional methods.
The debt is real, it is highly measurable, and the consequences of defaulting on it are existential for these businesses. The white paper's diagnosis of the problem is just flawless. But as the authors quickly pivot to point out, the traditional consulting response to this diagnosis is fundamentally broken. It simply cannot scale to meet the crisis.
Yes, the diagnosis is only half the battle. If we accept the severity of the problem, we have to critically examine how the industry has historically tried to solve it. And that brings us to what the paper calls the practitioner's cage.
The traditional consulting model for fixing this level of organizational debt sounds like an absolute slog. If you are a practitioner listening to this, you know this pain intimately. Picture the standard engagement. A highly qualified VCISO comes into a mid-sized manufacturing business. They spend weeks conducting interviews and running scans to perform a gap assessment. They write up a massive 100-page remediation plan.
The massive binder.
Right. And then they embark on this brutal 12 to 18-month journey trying to slowly change the company culture, build new governance structures, implement complex technical controls, and pay down that decade of debt while the business tries to keep the lights on.
It is an endurance event for everyone involved. And to be clear, the practitioners doing this work are generally excellent. The problem isn't their technical competence or their dedication. The problem is that the traditional delivery model itself throttles their impact. The white paper identifies 3 major systemic problems with this legacy model, starting with what they call the throughput ceiling.
The numbers the authors present here highlight a mathematical impossibility. You have approximately 80,000 defense contractors that need some level of formal CMMC compliance. But the pool of highly qualified practitioners, the registered practitioners, the experienced VCISOs, the CMMC-focused MSP teams, is incredibly tiny compared to that overwhelming demand.
And if you are one of those top-tier practitioners and your traditional engagement model demands 12 to 18 months of sustained heavy involvement per client, your personal bandwidth is severely capped.
You can't take on more work.
You can realistically only handle maybe 3 to 5 active clients at any given time before the quality of your work degrades. But the true tragedy of this mathematical bottleneck is how these brilliant practitioners are actually spending their days.
Doing paperwork.
Exactly. Instead of acting as high-level strategic advisors guiding executive boards through complex risk decisions, they are spending months doing tedious analytical and documentary work. They are buried in scoping analysis, architecture comparisons, drafting massive system security plan narratives line by line, and organizing endless evidence folders. They are acting as highly paid, glorified document producers.
They're trapped in the paperwork mines. You have these brilliant security minds, people who understand advanced persistent threats and zero-trust architectures, spending 80% of their week formatting Word documents, adjusting margins, and chasing down network diagrams.
It's like a waste of their talent.
It is a massive misallocation of expertise at a time when the industry desperately needs their strategic insight, and that extended manual timeline leads directly to the second major issue the white paper identifies.
The sustained willpower problem. This is where the theory of organizational debt really intersects with the reality of business operations. Most small to mid-sized defense contractors simply do not possess the institutional capacity or the attention span to sustain an 18-month cultural transformation.
If you are an executive listening, consider your own bandwidth. Think about a typical 50-person manufacturing company. They might have 10 million to 50 million in annual revenue. They have maybe 2 or 3 IT staff members who do everything from configuring the ERP system to resetting passwords and fixing the jammed printer in accounting.
Which happens every week.
Every week, they have absolutely zero dedicated compliance staff. The leadership team is constantly worried about supply chain disruptions, making the Friday payroll, and getting physical products out the door to meet strict delivery schedules. Now, the traditional compliance model asks that company to sustain a massive, parallel, highly technical work stream for a year and a half. It is an impossible demand on their collective attention.
It truly is. The white paper lays out the predictable headwinds of this extended timeline, and anyone who has worked in consulting will feel this breakdown in their bones. Let's trace the typical degradation.
Let's do it.
In months 1 and 2, everyone is enthusiastic. The kickoff meeting goes well. The budget is allocated. The executive sponsor is engaged and making strong statements about the importance of security. Everyone believes they are going to conquer this.
The honeymoon phase.
Yeah.
The VCISO is the most popular person in the building.
Right. But then reality sets in. By months 3 and 4, competing operational priorities inevitably emerge. A key client threatens to pull a contract because of a production delay, or the supply chain throws a massive curveball. Executive attention naturally and immediately drifts away from the abstract compliance project and back toward the burning operational fires.
And then what happens?
By months 5 through 8, progress on the compliance front slows down to an agonizing crawl. The IT personnel who are supposed to be implementing controls are pulled back into daily help desk tickets. Scope creep starts to infect the project as they realize they didn't fully understand their own network architecture.
And then the deep fatigue really sets in around months 9 to 12. The original timeline slips. The VCISO is sending update emails that go unread. The CFO is looking at the ongoing budget pressure, seeing the consulting invoices piling up and asking, are we done yet? What are we actually paying for?
And by months 13 to 18, it is just pure exhaustion. Organizational patience is completely depleted, the assessment readiness is still highly uncertain, and the worst part is, remediating one vulnerability often reveals 2 new gaps they hadn't considered.
It's like whack-a-mole.
It is. And it's crucial to understand that this degradation isn't a failure of character on the part of the business owners or the IT staff. It is simply a predictable systemic consequence of asking a normal profit-driven organization to sustain focus on an entirely bureaucratic, non-revenue-generating process for longer than its natural business cycle.
The 18-month timeline is incredibly fragile.
And experienced practitioners know it. They watch these projects collapse under their own weight all the time. But in the traditional model, they can't speed it up because the manual documentation work, the interviews, the evidence gathering, it just takes as long as it takes.
And to add insult to injury, the traditional business model actually punishes the practitioner for trying to be faster or more innovative. This is problem 3 from the white paper, the fee structure mismatch.
This highlights the perverse economic dynamic of the compliance consulting industry. If you are billing a client hourly or on a standard time and materials basis, a truly brilliant practitioner who figures out how to leverage automation or exceptional efficiency to get a client fully prepared in 2 months actually earns significantly less revenue than a mediocre practitioner who drags the exact same engagement out for 12 months.
Efficiency is literally punished. Your reward for saving the client 10 months of agony is a massive pay cut. The traditional model rewards thoroughness in document production over speed in reaching the client's actual primary goal, which is simply passing the assessment and keeping their contracts.
It is a broken system that misaligns the incentives of the practitioner with the needs of the client.
So to summarize the first third of this white paper, we have a terrifying diagnosis. The organizational debt is real, the DOJ enforcement is here, and the option years are expiring. And we have a deeply flawed response. The current way practitioners are forced to try and solve this is too slow, too fragile, and economically misaligned. This is the perfect setup for where the white paper introduces its radical reframe.
Yes. For a decade, the conventional wisdom in the cybersecurity industry has always been that organizational debt requires a massive organizational change. You need a top-down cultural transformation. You need to change how everyone in the company thinks about security.
Which is incredibly hard.
But the white paper argues something completely different, and it's a profound shift. It argues that the scale of change management required within a company is not a fixed monolithic burden. Rather, the change management required is directly proportional to the perceived size, duration, and ambiguity of the problem.
That is a massive shift in strategic thinking. If you can fundamentally compress the problem, the corresponding change management required compresses right along with it. It goes from being an open-ended, terrifying organizational transformation that everyone wants to avoid into just a bounded, specific, highly manageable IT project.
Think about the psychological difference for the executive team. If the proposed journey takes 18 months, you need sustained executive willpower across multiple budget cycles, you have to survive staff turnover, and you have to constantly defend the project against competing priorities.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
But if the analytical foundation, the comprehensive roadmap, the architecture design, the exact cost arrives in a matter of days, the organization reaches the critical decision point before internal resistance even has time to organize.
If you walk into a room and tell people this compliance initiative touches every single department, every employee, and every system, you need massive enterprise-level change management. But if you can walk in and say, actually, through our analysis, this only touches 85 people out of 500 and only 4 specific network zones, the change management is suddenly drastically reduced.
Exactly.
It is just about coordinating a few stakeholders and doing a phased rollout in one department. It is a localized project, not a company-wide culture shift.
And consider the factor of ambiguity. If the path forward is ambiguous, if no one in the room really understands which cloud architecture to use or what the assessor actually wants to see for a specific control, every single decision requires a committee. It requires endless debate, competing vendor pitches, and fear of making the wrong choice.
Paralysis by analysis.
Right. But if you arrive with a specific pre-validated architecture, a quantified total cost of ownership, and sequenced implementation steps, the executive team isn't debating philosophy anymore. They are just making a standard business go or no-go decision based on hard numbers. You've removed the ambiguity that fuels procrastination and resistance.
This entire reframe hinges on a really important breakdown of how compliance work actually happens in the real world. The white paper introduces an 80-20 rule for this specific type of CMMC engagement. Let's walk through that framework because this proves exactly why the practitioner's time is currently being wasted and how it can be reclaimed.
Absolutely. The white paper divides the totality of a CMMC engagement into 3 distinct categories of work. Let's start from the bottom. Category 3 is the technical execution. This is the client's actual IT work. Configuring the multi-factor authentication on the firewalls, deploying the new summon tool, physically segmenting the network switches. That takes real unavoidable time, and importantly, neither the SCA platform nor the advisory practitioner can do that for the client. That is the client's inherent burden.
Right, someone at the company or their delegated MSP actually has to turn the digital wrenches and make the configuration changes.
Exactly. But the remaining work, the practitioner's work, is where the 80-20 split becomes critical. Category 2 is the advisory and judgment work. This is where the practitioner's hard-earned expertise is absolute gold. It's validating the scoping inputs, interpreting the risk output for the specific client context, briefing the board of directors, tailoring the implementation guidance to the company's unique operational constraints, and handling the highly nuanced C3PO interactions during the audit.
High-level strategic stuff.
But traditionally, this high-value work only makes up about 20% of their total build time.
Because the other 80% is consumed by Category 1?
Yes. Category 1 is the analytical and documentary work. This is the grueling scoping analysis, the the manual architecture comparison, drafting the SSP narrative from scratch, manually mapping control dependencies across a massive spreadsheet, calculating the SPRS score by hand, building the intricate plan of action and milestones, and organizing hundreds of disparate evidence folders.
All the manual heavy lifting.
This work is absolutely essential for passing the assessment, but it is fundamentally procedural and deterministic. It takes up 80% of the practitioner's time, and according to the white paper's core thesis, it is highly automatable.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this isn't just a localized theory about CMMC, right? The authors back this up with some serious cross-industry data to prove this is a systemic issue in compliance.
They do, and the data is compelling. They cite a 2024 survey from Audit Board that looked at compliance teams across various industries more broadly. That survey found that these highly trained compliance teams spend only about 15% of their time on actual advisory work and risk analysis, and a staggering 85% of their time on traditional manual compliance tasks, like evidence gathering, formatting, and documentation.
Which is just crazy.
The white paper also points to the FedRAMP 20X program, which was launched by the federal government in 2025. That program formally mandated that at least 70% of compliance evidence be automated for its pilot participants. The federal government itself is openly acknowledging that the vast majority of this documentary burden can and absolutely should be automated by machines, not humans.
So if you are a VCISO, and you can use the streamlined compliance architecture to automate that 80% of Category 1 work, you completely empower yourself. You compress months of mind-numbing documentary slog into days, and more importantly, you free yourself up to shine in that 20%, the high-value strategic Category 2 advisory work that executives actually want to pay premium rates for.
You become a strategic guide, a true risk advisor, instead of a high-pressed document mule.
That is the core thesis of the paper. And the authors don't just leave it at high-level theory. They provide 5 specific, highly actionable mechanisms that the SEA uses to achieve this incredible compression of time and effort. Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's dive deep into these 5 mechanisms. They are broken into 2 parts. Part 1 focuses on scope and time. Mechanism 1 is scope minimization. If you are a practitioner walking into a hostile boardroom, why is this the very first lever you pull?
Because the single biggest source of organizational resistance to any compliance initiative is the executive's perception of the problem size. When a CEO hears, "We need to comply with 110 highly technical, government-mandated security controls across the entire company," their rational immediate response is to defend their budget.
Of course.
They will try to defer it, downscope it, or outright deny it. In their mind, they see unbounded cost, total operational disruption, and a massive distraction from their core business.
But the reality of the framework is that CMMC Level 2 only applies to the CUI environment, the specific people, systems, and facilities that actually process, store, or transmit controlled unclassified information.
Yeah.
It rarely applies to the entire company unless they are horribly disorganized.
Exactly. For most manufacturing companies, the true CUI environment is just a fraction of the enterprise. But because traditional manual scoping takes so long, requiring endless interviews and data flow mapping, contractors usually panic and make one of 2 devastating errors.
What are those?
They either overscope, applying expensive, highly restrictive controls to systems and people that don't actually need them, which inflates their compliance costs by 3 to 5 times. Or, conversely, they underscope to save money, missing critical systems that actually do handle CUI, which leads directly to failing the assessment after spending $100,000 trying to get ready.
Both of those errors cause massive political resistance internally. Overscoping makes the project look like a terrifying enterprise transformation, so everyone fights it from day one. Underscoping destroys the VCISO's credibility when the auditor finds CUI on an unprotected server and fails them. So how does the practitioner use the SEA to shrink the problem instantly and avoid both traps?
Instead of starting the engagement with the traditional question of what controls do we need to implement, the SEA methodology starts with phase 1, structural import. The platform ingests the organization's raw metadata.
Like what kind of data?
The total employee count, the specific lists of CUI handlers, facility locations, device inventory, and data flows, and it computationally maps the precise CUI boundary based on strict dependency rules.
And it gives you specific quantified metrics that you can take straight to the board. The example provided in the white paper is brilliant. Imagine you are sitting with a CEO who is panicking because they have 250 employees and they think they need to buy 250 expensive Microsoft E5 licenses and force every single warehouse worker to use complex MFA.
which would be a nightmare.
A total nightmare. But the practitioner runs the SCA pipeline and comes back with an executive scope reduction summary that says, look, I analyzed the data. Only 23 of your 250 employees actually touch CUI. 91% of your workforce is entirely excluded from this rigorous requirement.
It changes the psychological temperature of the room instantly. The practitioner can also tell them, we map the network. We only have 4 in-scope systems. Your entire guest wireless infrastructure is out of scope. Portable media is out of scope.
That's huge.
When the practitioner walks into the executive meeting with those precise defensible numbers, the political dynamics invert completely. The CEO goes from saying, this affects everyone, it's too expensive, let's wait until next year, to saying, okay, 23 people and 4 specific servers. That is a bounded project we can easily manage. Let's execute.
But if you are listening to this and you've done this work, you are probably screaming at your device right now. What if the inputs are garbage? What if the organization doesn't even know its own scope? Like the internal IT director swears there are only 5 CUI handlers, but there are actually 50 people emailing sensitive drawings to each other.
That is a critical point, and frankly, that is the default reality for most defense contractors, not the exception. The traditional consulting model handles this garbage-in problem with sequential discovery. Months of painful interviews, arguing with department heads, and running network scans before any real analysis can even happen.
Which just drags everything out.
The SCA changes this from a sequential, months-long slog into a rapid iterative cycle. The practitioner takes the client's initial flawed estimates, runs the pipeline, and the platform's outputs themselves often service the errors through logical inconsistencies.
Give me an example of that.
For example, if the IT director says there are 5 CUI handlers, but the pipeline flags a massive anomaly showing that only 2% of the workforce is in scope, which is statistically absurd for a manufacturer holding multiple ITAR contracts, the anomaly is immediately visible to the practitioner.
The practitioner sees that red flag, investigates the discrepancy, forces the client to fix the input, and then just clicks a button to rerun the pipeline. Because the pipeline executes its deterministic computation in hours, not months, the cost of that iteration is basically zero. You can do multiple rounds of discovery, correction, and analysis in the time it used to take just to schedule the initial kickoff meetings.
Exactly.
Which leads us perfectly into the second part of this section. Fixing those inputs natively requires time, and time is exactly what these contractors don't have. That's why the second lever the practitioner has to pull is mechanism 2, time compression.
We spent a lot of time earlier talking about the sustained willpower problem. It is vital to recognize that organizational resistance is not instantaneous. It requires time to form. Skeptics need time to find allies in other departments. Competing operational priorities need time to pop up and steal budget.
It's a race against the clock.
If the practitioner can deliver the finished compliance artifacts before that internal resistance can organize and metastasize, the practitioner wins.
The white paper breaks down the SCA pipeline phases, and the timeline comparison is just mind-blowing. If you are used to the 18-month model, listen to this. Phase 1, structural import, which we just discussed, takes hours. Phase 2, TCO selection, where the platform generates multiple architecture candidates with comprehensive 3-year total cost of ownership comparisons, takes hours.
Hours, not weeks.
All right. Phase 3, the twin stream build, which produces detailed asset inventories and intricate network topologies, takes days. Phase 4, implementation planning, takes days. Phase 5, operational verification, giving you your near final SSP and exact SPRS scores, takes days. And Phase 6, generating the final auditor artifacts, takes days.
It is a profound paradigm shift. Months of traditional agonizing manual work compressed into a computational process measured in hours and days. At the end of this rapid cycle, the practitioner produces up to 10 complete massive deliverables.
Like what?
Including the comprehensive system security plan, the exact SPRS readiness report, the detailed POA&M worksheet, all computationally validated, customized for the client's environment, and branded with the consulting firm's identity.
And what's crucial is that the delivery is incremental. The scope reduction summary we talked about is available within hours of the first meeting. The executive team is looking at their drastically reduced scope and specific cost options before they have even fully decided to commit the massive budget to the project. You, as the practitioner, are delivering immense tangible value and specific answers before the skeptics can even clear their throats to object.
Time compression is the ultimate weapon against organizational resistance. You completely eliminate the budget cycle problem because you deliver the entire analytical phase within a single fiscal quarter. You eliminate the personnel risk problem because you don't need a single internal champion to maintain momentum and morale for a year and a half.
Okay, so if you are the VCISO, you've successfully shrunk the scope to a manageable size, and you have delivered the master plan at light speed. That brings us to part 2 of the mechanisms, which focuses on fait accompli and authority. Let's look at mechanism 3, artifact fait accompli. I have to say, the pure psychology of this maneuver is fascinating. It's incredibly pragmatic.
It is brilliant because it deeply understands corporate behavior. Traditional compliance consulting requires consensus at every single painful step. You debate the approach in a committee, you beg for budget approvals, you slowly produce a document over months, sending it around for endless revision.
And every step is a chance to stall.
Every single step, every meeting is a chance for the project to stall or be derailed by a dissenting executive. The SCA inverts this dynamic entirely. The practitioner uses the platform to deliver a complete, mathematically validated, professional-grade deliverable package, the massive SSP, the detailed POANM, the architecture analysis, before the organization has even fully committed to the technical approach.
The artifacts land on the CEO's desk as a fait accompli, a done deal, a fully realized reality.
Exactly. It fundamentally shifts the debate. The conversation in the boardroom is no longer the open-ended, terrifying question of should we start writing an SSP and trying to figure this out. It becomes a highly specific binary choice. Here is your finished, formatted, compliant SSP. The analytical work is already done. Do we accept it and move directly to the technical implementation, or do you, Mr. CEO, want to reject it, throw it in the trash, and spend $100,000 in a year of your team's life manually redoing the exact same analysis?
The economics of rejection make accepting the practitioner's plan the overwhelming path of least resistance. It's almost a psychological trap, but a benevolent one. You give them a completed, highly complex puzzle and say you can either frame this and we move on, or you can smash it to pieces and try to put it back together yourself while the DOJ breathes down your neck.
Yeah.
Nobody is going to smash it. They are going to accept it.
And because the platform allows you to share these artifacts securely through authenticated links rather than emailing massive PDFs, the review process is decentralized. The CFO can look at the financial TCO analysis on their own time, and the IT director can dig into the technical implementation plan independently. You don't need a massive, highly contentious committee meeting to review every single page simultaneously.
That sets up the practitioner incredibly well. They have the plan, it's accepted, but they still have to deal with stubborn internal stakeholders during the actual implementation phase, which is where mechanism 4 comes in, authority transfer. If you've ever tried to force an IT department to change their habits, you know how hard this is.
Oh, it's nearly impossible. The internal compliance champion, say a quality manager who was voluntold to handle CMMC or an IT director, usually does not have the raw political authority to mandate massive disruptive changes across the enterprise.
Right.
When they tell the VP of engineering that they need to implement strict multi-factor authentication on all legacy production systems, causing a minor slowdown in workflow, the VP will fiercely fight back. And even an external VCISO is ultimately just one person giving an expert opinion. Skeptical, profit-driven executives dismiss expert opinions all the time if those opinions threaten their operational speed.
And you just brush it off. Oh, that's just a security guy being paranoid. We've operated this way for 20 years and we've never been hacked. We don't really need to do that.
Exactly. They view it as a suggestion, not a mandate. But they have a much, much harder time dismissing deterministic, traceable regulatory analysis. The SCA platform doesn't replace the practitioner's expertise. It drastically amplifies their credibility. It provides a highly visible, mathematically sound regulatory citation chain for every single recommendation.
So instead of the VCISO sitting in the meeting saying you need MFA because it's industry best practice and I highly recommend it, they can pull up the platform and say, according to NIST SP 800-171, Section 3.5.3, you are legally required to implement MFA for local and network access to privileged accounts.
Right here in black and white.
Based on the platform's analysis of your network, your current configuration satisfies only 2 of the 4 required assessment objectives. Here are the 2 specific technical gaps, and here is the exact verbatim language the DoD assessor will use to fail your entire company if you don't fix this.
It transfers the authority from the practitioner's subjective personal opinion directly to the underlying unyielding regulatory framework. It gives the practitioner deterministic, computationally traceable backing. The executive can argue with a consultant's opinion. They cannot argue with the math or the direct citation of the law.
It's bulletproof.
The practitioner brings the business context and the nuanced implementation strategy, but the platform brings the undeniable computational rigor.
It totally changes the power dynamic in the boardroom. The practitioner isn't pleading, they are translating a hard reality, which perfectly sets up mechanism 5, interactive explainability. To me, reading this section of the white paper, this sounds like an absolute superpower for a live executive meeting.
It really is the ultimate tool for maintaining momentum. Picture the high-stakes scenario. The practitioner is presenting the final architecture plan to the board. The CFO, whose primary job is to look for any reason to cut costs, asks a highly specific, aggressive question.
As they always do.
Why are you recommending we migrate our entire engineering department to this incredibly expensive Microsoft GCC high cloud environment? Why can't we just build a small, isolated physical enclave in our existing server room? It seems much cheaper. In a traditional consulting model, the practitioner is caught flat-footed. They might have to say, that's a good question. Let me run some new financial models and get back to you next week.
And momentum dies right there. The meeting ends, the budget approval is delayed, and the skeptics have a week to tear the project apart.
But with the SCA's interactive explainability, the practitioner doesn't pause. They query the platform live right there on the screen. They pull up the backward-looking trace and say, we actually evaluated that exact option. A physical enclave was computationally rejected because your specific 3-site business configuration would require separate redundant hardware at each physical location.
Boom.
Based on the platform's TCO model, that physical approach actually increases your 3-year total cost of ownership by $340,000 compared to migrating to GCC High with a VDI intercept. Furthermore, the platform shows that GCC High automatically inherits 72 controls directly from Microsoft, whereas the physical enclave inherits 0, meaning your IT team would have to manually manage all of them.
It's a mic drop moment. Question answered, backed by customized hard data, instantly. You just save the engagement from stalling, and you prove to the CFO that you've already thought 3 steps ahead of them.
It builds incredible trust.
But it is not just about defending past architectural decisions. The white paper details 4 forward-looking queries that the platform can run, and I find these even more fascinating. These operate against what the authors call the client's living compliance state. Let's break these down, because this is where the platform moves from being a document generator to a dynamic risk engine. The first forward-looking query is, are we ready for assessment?
This is exactly how you prevent that catastrophic false start risk we talked about in the beginning. In the legacy model, readiness is a gut feeling based on a spreadsheet. Instead of guessing, the platform computationally evaluates every single control against the current state of the evidence. It checks the temporal freshness of the evidence.
Like checking the expiration dates.
Exactly. Is this firewall screenshot older than the strict 90-day requirement for technical evidence or the 365-day requirement for policy documents? It traces complex dependency cascades. If a policy is missing, it flags all the technical controls that rely on that policy. It checks showstopper gates. And it tells the practitioner, with mathematical certainty, exactly which controls will pass, which will draw intense assessor scrutiny, and which will outright fail.
It's a full-blown assessment simulation. You know your score before the auditor even steps out of their car.
Yeah.
The second forward-looking query is the what-if scenario.
Yeah.
What happens if we change X?
Right. Business environments are dynamic. The client might say, what if we drop our CrowdStrike licensing to save money and switch entirely to Microsoft Defender? Or what if we acquire this small machine shop down the street?
A real-world business pivot.
The platform creates a temporary fork of the client's current compliance state, applies the hypothetical change, computationally retraverses all the dependencies, and gives you a side-by-side comparison. You can see exactly how a vendor tool swap impacts your final SPRS score, your control inheritance, and your budget before you sign a single purchase order.
Incredible. You are modeling risk in real time. Query number 3. We just implemented Control X. What changed?
This is all about maintaining real-time progress and morale. The client's IT team finishes deploying a difficult control, like network segmentation. The practitioner logs into the platform and records it. The platform instantly recalculates the entire compliance posture. It shows the live SPRS score ticking up, flags the newly met controls, and dynamically updates the roadmap for what to tackle next.
It gamifies the progress.
It does, providing immediate positive reinforcement to a team that is usually just getting beaten down by the sheer volume of work.
And the final query. Is our evidence still current?
This gives the practitioner continuous automated visibility into evidence decay. You absolutely do not want to find out during the actual high-stakes assessment that your critical configuration screenshot is 6 months old and therefore invalid.
Oh, that would be devastating.
The platform continuously monitors the age of the artifacts. It flags what is fresh, what is getting stale and needs attention soon, and what has already expired, allowing the practitioner to proactively direct the client to recollect specific evidence before a compliance gap reopens.
And I want to pause here because the white paper goes out of its way to emphasize a crucial technical point about how all of this explainability works. The authors stress that this is not AI hallucination. This isn't a generative large language model just guessing at an answer that sounds plausible based on training data.
That is a critical fundamental distinction. In a regulatory environment where a wrong answer can lead to a DOJ investigation, you cannot rely on a black box AI guessing. Every single computation in the SCA, the SPRS scoring, the dependency traversal, the cost cascade analysis is entirely deterministic.
It's hard math.
It is citing specific practice IDs, rigid point weights, and hard dependency edges hard-coded in the knowledge base. The AI is only utilized at the very end of the process, acting as a translation layer to generate a readable, human-friendly narrative summary of the hard deterministic math. The practitioner can trust the output completely because they can click through and audit the exact computational trace that led to the result.
The math is the math.
Yeah.
So we have these 5 powerful interconnected mechanisms. Let's pull the lens back and put them all together into a cohesive workflow. The white paper organizes the practitioner's journey into 3 distinct phases: map, build, and prove. If you are a VCSO adopting this architecture, how does this actually play out over the life cycle of an engagement?
It follows the natural logical life cycle of a major project, but it strategically deploys the mechanisms to solve the specific organizational frictions that typically derail projects at each step. The very first phase is map. This encompasses the structural import and the total cost of ownership selection.
This is where you solve the initial executive panic. The dominant friction at this starting line is executive screaming, everything is in scope. The cloud migration is too expensive, we can't afford this. The practitioner deploys Mechanism 1, scope minimization, to shrink the terrifying enterprise problem down to specific manageable numbers. And they use Mechanism 5, explainability, to prove exactly why they are recommending one specific architecture over another, backed by hard TCO data.
Exactly. You neutralize the panic with bounded data. Once the map is approved, you move to the build phase. This is the twin stream build, where the platform generates the massive implementation plans, the policies, and the asset inventories.
And the friction here is usually deferral.
Right. It's the IT director saying, oh, my guys can handle writing these policies in their spare time, or we'll worry about collecting the evidence later, let's just buy the firewalls.
And the practitioner solves that dangerous deferral with Mechanism 3, artifact fait accompli. You hand them the massive, highly detailed implementation package on day 3. It becomes blindingly obvious to the executive team that their overworked IT guy absolutely cannot do this in his spare time. It's a specific, undeniable, monumental pile of work that requires focused execution.
Finally, after the technical work is done, you reach the proof phase, operational verification. This is about producing the final SSP, calculating the exact SPRS score, finalizing the POA&M, and conducting the assessment simulation.
And the overwhelming organizational friction at this final stage is usually deep overconfidence. It's the leadership team saying, we passed our self-assessment last year, we got all the tools you asked for, we are 95% ready, let's just call the auditor.
The final delusion phase before the crash.
Yes. And the practitioner cuts through that dangerous delusion with Mechanism 4, authority transfer. They don't just say, I don't think you are ready. They present a deterministic, evidence-validated SPRS score generated by the platform. They use the forward-looking assessment simulation to say, you aren't 95% ready. Based on the hard evidence currently in the system, you are at a 40.
A harsh reality check.
Here is a control-by-control breakdown of exactly what the C3 PAO will fail you on if we walk into that audit today. It instantly brings everyone back to reality with cold, actionable data.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, what does this all mean for the long term? Because getting compliant once, as grueling as it is only the beginning. The white paper points out a terrifying reality that many contractors ignore: the year 2 nightmare.
This is the brutal problem of entropy. CMMC certification is not a one-and-done static event. You don't just put the certificate on the wall and forget about it. You have rigorous annual affirmations by a senior executive. You have triennial reassessments by the C3PAO, and you have constant, unavoidable environmental change.
A company opens a new satellite office. They upgrade an operating system across the fleet and accidentally break a critical STIG configuration setting. The lead IT person who built the environment quits and takes the knowledge with them.
The business keeps moving, and the network keeps changing.
And in the traditional manual model, this constant change creates an unstoppable entropy cascade. A minor scope change happens, which means the massive Word document SSP is instantly stale. Because the SSP is stale, the IT team is collecting the wrong evidence. Because the evidence is wrong, the self-reported SPRS score becomes legally inaccurate. By the time the next formal assessment rolls around in 3 years, the organization is facing a massive, incredibly expensive remediation effort all over again just to figure out what broke.
The organizational debt rapidly reaccumulates. You're back to square one, once again begging for executive willpower and budget to fix a mess. So how does a streamlined compliance architecture fundamentally reverse this entropy flywheel?
It solves it by maintaining what they call a living compliance state. Because the SCA is a dynamic computational engine rather than a static stack of PDFs, the platform allows for granular, continuous posture updates without having to rerun the entire painful pipeline.
Meaning, if they make a small change, they don't have to start over.
If the IT team deploys MFA on a newly acquired system, the practitioner just updates that one specific control state in the platform, and the engine automatically recomputes the cascading effects across the entire SSP and SPRS score instantly. The documentation is always current, mirroring reality perfectly.
It is continuous compliance, practically. But what about the massive burden of evidence collection? Because asking overworked IT employees to manually take hundreds of configuration screenshots every single quarter is a permanent demoralizing tax on their time. They hate it, they resent it, and inevitably they eventually just stop doing it.
The elegant solution here is turning evidence collection from a manual chore into an automated operational byproduct. The SCA platform supports deploying continuous evidence agents that read the actual system state directly via APIs.
So no more taking screenshots.
No. They automatically check the live firewall configuration, the Active Directory access policies, the current patch levels. The evidence exists in the platform simply because the secure systems are running and the agents are observing them. It effectively ends the permanent manual compliance tax on the human workforce.
That is massive for employee retention and IT morale alone. And speaking of retention, we have to talk about knowledge persistence. This is a huge vulnerability for consulting firms and contractors alike. What happens when the brilliant VCISO who set all this up moves on to a new job, or the internal IT director retires to Florida?
In the traditional model, the entire institutional memory walks out the door with them. The next poor person who takes the job has to try and decipher a bunch of outdated cryptic Excel spreadsheets and vaguely named folders on a shared drive. It takes months just to understand the current posture.
It's forensic accounting for IT.
But with the SCA, the platform structurally retains everything. Every single scoping decision, every mathematical architecture rejection, every historical note on the POA&M. When a new practitioner or a new IT director takes over, they log in and inherit a complete, perfectly documented, computationally verifiable compliance state. The vital institutional memory is locked safely in the platform, not fragilely held in someone's head.
It makes the engagement entirely resilient to the inevitable personnel changes over a 3-year cycle. Now, as much as this framework sounds like the ultimate silver bullet for the industry, the white paper includes a highly specific section at the end titled An Honest Caveat. This raises an important question. What are the actual limitations here? The authors aren't claiming this is magic.
The authors are very transparent, which is incredibly refreshing for a white paper in this space. They explicitly point out that as of their writing in March 2026, the SCA is a fully functional architectural framework and an operational software system that has been built and tested internally, but it is still awaiting field-validated C3PAO assessment outcomes at scale.
Right. It works perfectly in the engine room, but it hasn't been through the crucible of thousands of actual adversarial third-party audits across the entire DIB yet.
Exactly. The claim that it can mathematically compress the massive documentation phase is strong and logically sound, but they are intellectually honest that the ultimate undeniable proof of the framework will be in the statistical assessment pass rates over the next year. And the second caveat they highlight is the classic, unavoidable, garbage in, garbage out problem of any computational system.
Yes. If the company fundamentally lies to the platform will give them confidently wrong outputs.
Precisely. The computational platform cannot verify what it cannot physically observe. If a client systematically misreports how they handle physical printed CUI or hides a shadow IT network from the structural import, the platform will generate a beautiful, compliant-looking architecture and SSP that is fundamentally flawed in reality.
It's a false sense of security.
That is exactly why the human practitioner's role in the iterative discovery phase is so vital. The platform doesn't replace the VCISO, it elevates them. Human judgment, skepticism, and strategic experience are still the anchor of the entire process. The platform does the heavy, deterministic lifting, but the practitioner is the pilot, making sure the coordinates entered are actually tied to reality.
The human element, the ability to look a CEO in the eye and know they are hiding a rogue server, is still the most important part of the equation. Okay, let's bring this all together. What we are looking at in this white paper is not just a new software tool. It is a fundamental redefinition of the entire role of registered practitioners, VCISOs, and MSPs in the defense sector. They are no longer destined to be high-priced document mules, trapped in a soul-crushing 12 to 18-month cycle of formatting Word documents, begging for executive attention and watching projects fail.
They are elevated to their rightful place as high-level strategic guides. They are armed with a deterministic computational engine that allows them to turn an overwhelming, paralyzing organizational transformation into a bounded, highly actionable, mathematically verified project that can be initiated and proven in days.
And for you listening, whether you are deeply embedded in defense contracting or you work in an entirely different, highly regulated industry, the core strategic lesson here is incredibly powerful. Organizational resistance within a company is almost always directly mathematically tied to the perceived size, duration, and ambiguity of a project. If you can leverage technology and frameworks like the SCA to radically compress the scope, compress the time to value, and provide deterministic, undeniable answers to skeptics, you can overcome almost any internal friction. You change the boardroom conversation from a terrified, should we attempt this massive transformation, to a confident, here is a specific manageable project with a known cost, let's execute.
I think the most provocative takeaway here is looking beyond just the DoD and CMMC. If 80% of the manual soul-crushing toil in one of the most rigorous, complex, heavily scrutinized cybersecurity compliance frameworks in the world can be successfully compressed into a deterministic, automated platform, what other unsolvable corporate bureaucracies in your own industry are just sitting there waiting for this exact kind of computational compression?
That is a fascinating thought to leave on. What other massive mountains of regulatory paperwork in healthcare, finance, or critical infrastructure are just waiting for the right architecture to turn them into manageable molehills? We will leave you to ponder that as you look at your own compliance backlogs. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the organizational debt problem, the empowerment of the practitioner, and the future of automated compliance. We will catch you on the next one.
Thanks for watching. If this was useful, please subscribe for more.